الحمد لله رب العالمين. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Today, brothers and sisters, we have a very important guest, very interesting guest. Uh, with us, we have John Jeter. He's published many books. He's author, obviously, he's an author, two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist with more than 30 years of journalism experience as a journalist. He's a former Washington Post bureau chief, award-winning foreign correspondent who's covered stories on three continents. He's written on a variety of topics spanning from intellectual property rights to criticism, literary criticism with specific interest in subjects such as social movements, cooperative economics, diversity, and inclusion. As you know, brothers and sisters, one of the reasons for calling on John is, of course, him being a journalist. He's worked in LA, he's in Washington, D.C. now. With what's happening in LA, what's happening in LA is not a new thing. I think the people of LA kind of understand this very well. We had many protests or demonstrations or riots taking place in LA. Police brutality is something that is known to the people in LA. We've had Rodney King case that we saw in '90s, and many more. But now, again, the National Guard is being called out. This has become more of an immigrant issue rather than, let's say, what happened with police brutality and what was happening with African Americans. And in the past, what we've seen happened with Black Panthers and many social justice movements. And so I thought we were looking for someone that could, discuss these matters with us, being on the ground, having that background, to give us where we're going now, what's next, what could be happening next. So again, John, welcome to Islamic Oasis Live.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor to be with you.
Thank you, John. Let's start this. I mean, LA. I mean, I think they're not what we're seeing in LA. I mean, I don't think this is new to the people of LA. People who've with the history of LA, with indigenous people, with African Americans, with police brutality, with all of these things. But so what's changing? What's happening in LA right now? Let's begin there. What is your assessment of what's taking place in
LA? The main thing is that the empire is collapsing. All of the incidents you mentioned with LA, the Rodney King, the riots that followed Rodney King, history doesn't unfold over a year. It unfolds over 20, 40 years. And you could almost track time back to the Rodney King riots, 1992, and see this is the culmination of what began then, which in itself was a response to the riots in LA in '65, the Watts riots, and the riots all over the country in '68 following Dr. King's death. And we're seeing the empire slowly. There's a line that I love from I think it's Ernest Hemingway, the sun always rises, where someone asks the protagonist, "How did you go broke?" And the protagonist answers, "Gradually and then suddenly." The American empire is collapsing gradually and then suddenly, although I would add that it's collapsing a little bit quicker than empires typically collapse. It's collapsing after about a century of hegemony in the world. And so the battle over immigrants is rooted in the same settler colonialism that the riots following the acquittal in Rodney King's case were rooted in, right? We're seeing the settler colonialists, and this is a fascinating story, right? It has a lot to do with technology. If you remember, Rodney King was because of the technology, right? Why has there been such a robust and vivid hostility towards what Israel is doing in Gaza? the technology. It's a live streamed genocide. And so I say all that to say that the technology is partly responsible for the acceleration of this decline. And so, it's not over, right? These are, as my African friends would say, the last kicks of a dying meal. And, anyone who is a farm boy, which I am not, but I still understand the metaphor, the last kicks of a dying mule can be deadly. So we are in for a very difficult time as the events in Iran show us, the events in Gaza and the events in LA. This is all part of the Western Empire collapsing, right? And we're trying to reorganize. I made a joke, sort of, although these are not things to joke about, but sort of a joke about, or maybe a more flip remark about the old Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci remark about how the old is dying, the new cannot yet be born. We're in the interregnum. Well, we're starting to see the head push through now, right? The new is starting to be born, and that's going to be violent and messy and ugly. But that's what's happening now, from LA to Iran to Gaza to Burkina Faso. All over the world, we're seeing the Western Empire collapse at our feet.
Man, this is interesting. So let's say here, I mean, why immigration, Sheikh? I mean, look, for instance, if you have, I'm sorry, I said Sheikh. I'm so used to discussing, constantly talking to Muslims. I'm trying to figure out. Sorry. Immigration. Why has this become such a big issue, John? Because, for instance, the American economy needs cheap labor, and the Spanish they have been providing cheap labor. I mean, you can't get any cheaper than what they have to offer, as far as, I mean, everyone knows this is, the billionaires have become billionaires because of the cheap labor.
No question.
And then you have, and California, and then, who's going to run the farms, John? Who's going to run these things now? But at the same time, the government, at least King Trump, is trying so hard to show that he's the king, and he's putting on the tariffs on the top of this, and economically, is this all sustainable? Because this is the thing, though. I mean, because he's putting on tariffs, which is going to make things internally more expensive, and at the same time, he's removing the people who are the labor that they need. And then, so that what happens, man? I mean, even manufacturing. Let's say even if Trump wants to bring back manufacturing, but even that, you need cheap labor. I mean, no one. I mean, so what's the thinking behind this? Let's talk policy here.
Yeah.
And one more thing before you can answer. Even now, they're talking about, I think, about 40% cuts when it comes to homelessness. Most of the people who are going to be homeless in the coming 2-3 years are going to be. Looks like they're going to be elderly, according to what the numbers are showing. That there'll be, huge amounts of elderly that they may be on the streets. Man, so what's the mindset here? Where is this going? Where is this going, man?
It's going to end in collapse. The ruling class they're out of answers. They don't have a response. Remember, I said these things, you have to look at them in 20, 40-year cycles. What are we seeing now? We're seeing the culmination of something that began around the time I was born. I was born in 1965, January of 1965. The height of the golden age of American industrialism. We were the big cheese in the world in manufacturing. No one has ever seen a manufacturing economy in terms of its density in the country, right? Almost 40% of all jobs were in manufacturing when I was born. And it's a singular miracle of the industrial era is manufacturing, which created a middle class, the density of which no other country has ever seen. China did it faster, but no one's ever seen the density manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing jobs, of course, being the key to prosperity. You can't get rich today without, sorry about that, without manufacturing. What was happening at the same time? What was happening at the same time was a radical revolution led by African Americans. Also, there were still many Jews and communists, Jews who were communists, a white left, mainly on the colleges, very much like what we see today in the anti-genocidal protests on college campuses. And there was a synergy, particularly after the murder, and you, I think, will appreciate this, after the assassination of Fred Hampton. Mm. There was a real synergy in that moment after Fred Hampton died. Bernardine Dorn, who was the one of the most high-profile members of the Weather Underground, a white leftist organization, famously at a meeting a few days after Fred Hampton was murdered, said that the only thing that Black revolutionaries need is, and she said profanity, which I won't repeat, but it shows just how committed she was. She says the only thing that Black revolutionaries need are white revolutionaries to back them up. This thing was moving. It had legs. It had momentum in the 60s after Fred Hampton died. They really miscalculated by killing Fred Hampton, because what it did is it drove whites, particularly young whites and Blacks, closer together, and Latinos. We saw that we saw almost for a moment his Rainbow Coalition really kind of coalesced in that moment. And it was a threat. It was moving, not just in terms of its cultural appeal, right? But in terms of its material, what it was able to do materially for people. So by 1973, 72, 71, 73, the workers in this country, led by this Blacks and whites uniting, not all, there's still racism, clearly, but they were able to grab for the workers more than 50% of gross domestic product, more than 50% of the national income went towards wages because of this movement. Blacks and whites, college students, Rainbow Coalition. The ruling class, the investors, and this is documented. This is not my opinion. Richard Nixon really began with this Southern strategy, trying to split Blacks and whites up. And we saw this, for instance, in Kent State, 6 months after Fred Hampton was killed. National Guardsmen, there's some evidence, but still we don't know for sure. But there's some evidence that Richard Nixon ordered the National Guard to open fire on the student protesters at Kent State. We don't know for sure. We know this, though. Richard Nixon was thrilled to see them open fire, because what it did was it sent a message to whites, and young whites in particular, who had an inkling to work with Blacks in this resistance movement, right, against the war, against racism. This was a moment when things really were starting to come together. And Richard Nixon, brilliantly, I mean, he was an evil man, but he was really a brilliant man, managed to push back and to send a message to whites, subtly but firmly, that if you continue to work with Blacks, you will be treated like Blacks. You will be shot down. Just an aside, there was a Black student union at Kent State, and that morning they saw the head of the Black student union at Kent State saw the National Guard assembling. And he said to all of the people in the Black student union, all the Blacks, we're not going out there, because if they shoot, they're going to shoot at us. And he talked about this years later. He was amazed to see that they shot at white people, right? He couldn't imagine that. So this was a shot across the bow. Now let's come back now 50 years later, 2025. What has happened? This Black and white coalition, tenuous, never perfect. This Black and white coalition has been split apart gradually, right? Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter didn't really do much to stitch it back together. Ronald Reagan came along and he blamed every problem that the United States had on welfare moms, Cadillac driving welfare moms, Black people, right? And white people, and I have to say this, I have no hatred for white people. I hate my oppressor. Many of them are white, however. And so this message that Ronald Reagan had it appealed to white Americans, right? It this idea that Black people are to blame, that they're not deserving of our largesse. I mean, if we send their jobs overseas, so what? They don't work hard enough. They're unpatriotic. And this became a narrative because really, no matter what we're talking about Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and what they're doing in Iran, immigration. It's a war of narratives.
Mm.
So since 1980, roughly, there's been no counter narrative. There's been one narrative that has won the day, that has ruled the day. And that narrative is false. It does not pay homage to reality, right? Black people are not responsible for everything that's gone wrong in this country, right? The Latinos who you brought in to replace blacks at a lower wage on these jobs, or you sent their jobs to Mexico, right, and then paid them a lower wage, and but you took their land, right? So people, farmers in Mexico can't make a living because you pushed them off the land. They came here looking for a decent living. You didn't really give it to them, and now you want them to go back home, right? That's the real narrative. And by the way, part of the reason we have a problem with immigration is because most business owners and farmer owners, particularly in California and Texas and places like that, they want immigration. So let's be clear about that, right? But now we've come to a point where this system is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, right? And the contradiction is this. And another Black revolutionary who you may or may not have heard of, from Chicago originally, George Jackson. He wrote in his book, Blood in My Eye, the biggest barrier to a united working class movement in the United States is white racism, right? So when we talk about everything that's going on in terms of the collapse of the United States and the Western Empire, France is dealing with the same thing, similar issues, right, with Burkina Faso and its former colonies, it is because of white racism, which asks, as I write in my latest book, Class War in America, Class War in America, how the elites divide the nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? For too long, right? For the last 50 years, certainly, most whites have answered that question with, I am white, right? Whiteness was created, as we know, from the work of the late Theodore Allen. It was invented, right, to be a sort of a scab, a buffer, to divide the working class. And that's what it's done. And so now we're coming to confront that contradiction. It doesn't work, and they don't have any answers. And so you ask me what's going to happen to the economy. I expect, beginning probably, or maybe anyway, as soon as next month, that we're going to be in a recession. And I think that recession could turn into a very real, epic economic downturn, similar to the Great Depression. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm saying I would not be surprised to see that happen, because everything that's happened over the last 50 years has worked to cripple a consumer economy. Why are we in this space where we have to wreck Iran, wreck Libya? Why are we trying to accumulate by dispossessing people? Because we no longer make anything of value. And we no longer make anything of value because we wanted, number one, to lower wages, but number two, we wanted to marginalize that radical Black power movement that was really galvanizing the working class in this country. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's a very long-winded answer, but I hope it explains to people this moment began when I was born 60 years ago, right? And this is the accumulation of, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle now. You can reorganize, but it's going to be painful. It's going to be hurtful. There's going to be confrontation. Donald Trump doesn't have any more answers. He doesn't know what he's doing, right? He is a leader. Donald Trump is the head of an apartheid state, and he doesn't realize his first responsibility is to deliver the goods to white people. He's not even doing that. So who's going to back Donald Trump, particularly with this, and this is the United States, Israel is just their proxy, in this, what is probably going to be a war with Iran? Who's going to back Donald Trump if he's going to war with Iran through Israel? He's already at war with Russia through Ukraine. Both of them, I think he's going to lose, clearly. And the economy sinks into a tailspin. Who's got Donald Trump's back? Not Wall Street. They're losing money hand over fist. Not the working class. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their Medicaid. Donald Trump is in very real trouble, as is this country. And it all comes back to white settler colonialism and the American racism that it produces.
Wow. Okay. So here's the thing. You mentioned. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. The usually, whenever. Okay, so when empires collapse, there's a lot of debris. There's what does that mean for the U.S., man? I mean, for instance, I mean, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, or we call it the Caliphate, uh, let's say the Roman Empire, or when we look at, uh, the Persians. From, I mean, let's look at the most recent one, the Ottoman Caliphate. The the moment it collapses, there are players already there to take up the role, right? Britain is taking up the role. Of course, right after that, the Americans come along, things like that, and you saw the carving up of the Ottomans, and Europe is looking to get the piece of the pie, and everybody was in there. When it comes to US, man, I mean, this is just to see what people here are thinking. What happens to the US as far as, fine, there is a collapse. Are we looking at 50 states? Are we looking at, uh, the country is divided in according to race? I mean, what happens, man? What does that collapse look like? Other than what we're seeing on the streets, I mean, and we may still see a continuum of U.S. empire, still maybe another few decades, but still, I mean, what happens to what does 50 years from now look like in the United States?
Oh boy. I have to be honest, I don't know.
Mm,
I will say this. What we're seeing, I mean, make no doubt about it, what we're seeing is a contest between fascism, represented by Donald Trump,
mm,
and socialism. Which one's going to win? I can't say. I think ultimately socialism will win because there's no other way. You can't go back to fascism, which we can argue we're already a fascist country. It doesn't work. We know this, right? We've seen it over the last 50 years. It doesn't work. You can't have a consumer economy where all the money is in the hands of the investors. They control 58% of GDP today. That makes no sense. It's upside down. You need us to have money. If you I'm not a communist, but I'll do until a communist gets here, right? If you want a functional capitalist economy, the people have to have money. That's not me. That's Hegel. That's Marx, right?
mm.
The people have to have money. The people don't have money right now. So there's no way that we can go into full throated fascism. You could argue we're already halfway there. There's no way because it's not sustainable. So ultimately, I do think we're going to have a socialist economy. How soon will that happen? Or at least an economy with very socialist tendencies. Maybe it's more like China, right? But an economy with socialist tendencies where it's not all privately owned. The U.S. economy is privately owned, almost 100% privately owned, right? That just is not sustainable. Here's what I hope happens, and I see signs of it, but I also see signs that it might not happen, that maybe it's just my wishful thinking. But here's what I hope happens, to bring it back again to the 60s and Fred Hampton's death. Fred Hampton, of course, famously championed, as he called it, black power for black people, white power for white people, brown power for brown people, X power for anyone left out. And what he meant by that was that everybody would have control to a certain degree over their own communities, over the schools, over the police, over the banks, right? Over the housing. This defines the deficits not only in the African American community, but to a lesser extent in the white working class community, in the Latino community, in all the communities except for the investment class. This defines our existence, our daily existence. We don't have control over the institutions that rule, that govern our daily lives, right? What I'm hoping, what I do see signs, I don't know if it's going to happen, is I'm seeing across the country, including in LA, although there I have to admit there are some blacks who say, and far too many, from what I know, from what my friends tell me, too many blacks who say, let the Latinos fight that fight. We got our own fights. That's backwards thinking. I hope it doesn't rule the day. I don't think it's going to rule the day. What I've seen and what I've heard from my friends in Chicago, especially in Chicago, in Detroit, here in DC, in New York City, is I've seen signs that Fred Hampton's vision of a rainbow coalition, it is regrouping and is expanding to include not just blacks, Jews who are really upset more now than ever by the Zionist capture, by the Zionist capture of American foreign policy and our contribution to genocide in Gaza, to the Muslim community, particularly in Chicago. I think it might be the second largest Palestinian population in the country now, and I think it was first before. But and I saw that going back to the protest in 2023 that began in 2023 and last year, really escalated last year. And of course, this immigrant community, much of which, the majority of which, has arrived in the United States post NAFTA, right? What does that mean? That means they tend to be more radicalized than their predecessors. They were radicalized by land struggles in Oaxaca, by the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, by land and environmental struggles in Honduras. I'm hopeful, not optimistic. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying I hope it happens. I believe there's a chance it can happen, that we see a real rainbow coalition. Remember, the United States is darker than it was when I was born in 1965. And so we have a different worldview. And so I'm hoping that all these mixtures of people, and we need some people to step up, right? We need, especially, I'll just be frank, we need to get rid of, I'm not urging violence, I'm just saying the marginalization of those black voices like Barack Obama, like Kamala Harris. We need to marginalize those voices, which for the last, certainly since the Obama administration, but really for the last 20 years or so, has been the spokesman for the black community. Very top-down orientation. We need the people on the bottom, the working class, poor, right, to speak. Because that, by the way, now in here, that narrative, people from the bottom, speaking truth to power, explaining what's going on in their neighborhoods, that is what drove the New Deal, the labor organizing that begat the New Deal, and then morphed into the civil rights movement, the radical black power movement, the anti-war movement, the lesbian gay movement. It all started with people, poor people, working people speaking their truth in the media, right? A lot of them in the media. That's what really drove a reorganization of society. I'm hoping that happens again, but even more so. But you know, in the interim, I'm afraid there's no avoiding the fact that we're in for a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, more death, more destruction, probably a lot more tribalism. Hopefully, it will hit a pitch or a peak soon and then begin to bottom out. But we're in for a world of hurt going forward. There's just no avoiding it.
You know, I was going to ask you, for instance, the Black Panthers. I mean, you know, COINTELPRO. I'm sure you've heard. I mean, I think even Black Panthers was one of the victims of COINTELPRO, and so was many Native American movements that were here. And Fred Hampton, you're talking about, also was part of all of this. I mean, is this? Look, I mean, we are entering into a complete new, maybe a security state that we didn't see before. You know, the unmarked cars, the people are being kidnapped in the middle of the streets. You know, all these. This is never. I mean, we saw this back home, but to kind of now see this here is surprising, but not. We're not. It's not shocking.
Not shocking, right?
But so what happens, man? Now you will see more Black Panther type movements on the streets. Are we? What are we in for? Like when I'm looking at the movements from within the Spanish, like in LA, for instance, you have certain groups who are trying to protect their neighborhoods. They're calling people being kidnapped, picked up as kidnapped. They're being kidnapped. The elderly, the parents are being, and then you hear the leadership there saying things like, if you're going to come into our neighborhoods, we're going to resist. And you also said resistance. There's going to be resistance. It's not just going to be some demonstration or protest. We're going to protect our families. So this is what I mean. Radicalization of the left is taking place. Militarization. That's one thing. Second thing, where will they? Usually, in the Muslim lands, in global South, let's say, whenever there is this type of revolutions or things that are boiling, there's always groups, cartels, kind of things that make money out of this, because somebody's got to provide the weapons, the bullets. All these things happen, and so I mean, is this all possible, man, in this country?
I don't think you can dismiss anything happening at this point in time. As I say, I think there's a real battle going on now between fascism and socialism. We do see, on a very local level, we see the reorganization of communities to defend ourselves, and that's Blacks, that's Latinos, immigrants, that's the Muslim community. But at the same time, we see a heightening because they're trying to hold on to power. The rich doesn't just hand power over; they're going to fight for it too. And so this might seem trite, but I think it's true. We're bracing for the mother of all battles here in the United States. I think that's true. I think it's unavoidable, right? We just have two narratives that can't be reconciled, and one, someone's going to have to exert their will over the other.
But this has happened, though, John, before.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
So,
here in the United States.
And so then, but U.S. has been able to. I mean, there's always a compromise, and they've been able to sustain, is what I'm saying. But now you're saying this is not sustainable. Is this because maybe let's say, is it when the empire is on the rise, there's just more resources available?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right.
And at this time, you're saying that those resources are no longer available.
So, and I should have started with this actually. And I just had this conversation earlier today by coincidence. Even Nazi Germany, right? These settler colonial outposts, these fascist outposts, apartheid in South Africa, what they're able to do is to divide the country along racial lines, typically. The Jews were seen as non-white in Nazi Germany. But in exchange for your whiteness, right? You're agreeing to a white identity. You are afforded certain benefits, right? That, at least as far as we know, that can only happen in an industrializing economy. That's what happened in apartheid in South Africa. Here in the United States after the World War II, where manufacturing just exploded. It happened in Nazi Germany. It offered to whites part of the industrializing economy, not as much a part as they would have had if they saw themselves as workers and worked with blacks, right? It's basically like a pizza pie, but instead of giving you half, the ruling class is giving you 40%. Say, if you want more, get it from the blacks, get it from the Latinos, get it from the Arabs, right? So what we have, and this is statistically true, we have the world's first post-industrial economy. In other words, we've never seen the greatest industrial power in the history of the world become a post-industrial state. How do we provide for all the people, right? We don't know, right? So again, this is going to be the mother of all battles as we reorganize and try to define what we're going to be in our next phase. How do you recreate? I don't think you can create industrialism. So what do we do to provide for the people, right? It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I do believe that there's going to have to be some kind of recognition that we have to reorganize and reinvent ourselves. We can do that. I do believe that. What if, just an example, what if, for instance, the United States said, we're going to become the world's, what if, two things. What if we said, we're going to be like Cuba? Cuba has become, this little island nation has become the world's humanitarian superpower. We're going to replace them. We're going to become the world's humanitarian superpower. We're going to use our universities and our academy, and we're going to create first a Medicare for all system here at home, right? But then we're going to spread we're going to invest in technology and knowledge. We're going to spread that all over the world. Maybe not even for profit, right? Maybe just as a goodwill gesture to rebuild faith in the United States. What if we did that? I mean, can you imagine the possibilities of that? But what if we also said we're going to create wind energy? We think wind energy is the future. We're going to build windmills all over this country, and then, if you want, right, China, South Africa, Brazil, right, we'll send you our windmill technology. Maybe we charge you for it, but we don't charge you an arm and leg. We charge you a fee that's sustainable. I mean, what if we think of ourselves in those terms as being the salvation, the saviors of the world, not by taking from it, but by giving to it? So now, am I saying that's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know, right? But I'm saying that I think it's possible. I think it's possible for, particularly with this younger generation, America hasn't worked for them. It's worked for me, right? It doesn't work right now. But I graduated from Florida A&M University in 1987, very little debt, got a job right out of school, a union position, made decent money. It's worked for America's worked for me, right? These young people, America's never worked for them. So I think we're going to see them. I think I can't predict anything. This situation is very volatile. We don't know what's going to happen, particularly with Iran and Israel. But I think that this younger generation, whites, blacks, Latinos, immigrants from the Middle East, I think they're going to reinvent America for the better eventually. I don't know when that's going to be. I think it's going to be relatively soon. I think we'll both be alive to see it. But I think they're going to begin to reinvent this country as something workable, right? Something less tribal, and something where the economy is a tool of the people, not the other way around. I think that's going to happen.
Let me ask you one more question. Look, Donald Trump last time, one of the reasons it seems like he fell apart was obviously he was not able to push back China as much as the deep state wanted. It seems there's something like that was happening, and it seems like they taught him a lesson that he couldn't come back. This time he came back with the promise that he's going to, he'll at least be able to push back China, the growth of China. But now, do you think, is there deep state involved in what's happening on the streets now? Or is you're saying this is natural, this is not deep state? But look, the reason I'm asking, because there is always someone, look, the question of funding, right? No matter what the question comes up, is that the protests are way too organized. They're organized. They're in every city. They can spread. The slogans are the same. The colors are the same. The kind of it's the same kind of it's the way it's set up. Do you think is there deep state involved? Number one. If not, where is the funding coming from?
Are you speaking of the protests against ICE?
Whether protests against ICE, or when you look at protests against the kind of policies that are happening, there's a lot. Obviously, there's just a lot going on. ICE is just another issue now. The protests are becoming very common in the U.S. So far, they've stayed at the level of protest. They haven't become a resistance movement.
Yeah. So let me. Yeah, that's a great question. I do believe there's a deep state. I do believe they are intimately involved in a lot of things we see. I think these protests are very organic. I'm going to tell you why. Um, I'm old enough to remember when protests and labor, organized labor, was active in the streets on almost maybe not a daily basis, but regularly, right? And then I saw it disappear, particularly in the 90s. And then when the recession hit, the Great Recession, 2008, I, I was in New York when the Occupy movement was born.
Mm,
And I saw it, I
interesting.
saw their struggle, and it was real. It was led by, um, in New York at least, college students, former college students who had too much debt, which, by the way, was where investors put their money after the subprime mortgage real estate market collapsed. They put their money into more of their money into the student loan industry, and I saw that and it was organic. I should point this out. The movement didn't quite know what it was doing, but it knew something. It knew something had to be done. And one of the things that we saw in New York was they knew they had to reach out to the Black and Latino communities and the Muslim communities in New York, which was just significant. They didn't know where to find them. We have been separated for so long, estranged for so long, they didn't know where to find them. And then, after
Hold
was it
on,
Michael
hold
Brown
on.
was killed.
Hold on, but please come back to the start. Don't forget.
Okay.
Okay, this is interesting. You're saying that they were separated.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the Muslims, have been looked at as terrorists, as radicals, as extremists. Everything in the book they used on us for, I mean, last 20 years has been. Uh, was that the reason? Was that when you say that these minorities, they were separated? Separated by what? Is it because we were kind of looked at as the other all the time? Was it, they? But and then what unites us today?
Um, well, separated by narrative,
Mm.
right? And this is really. I'm actually glad you stopped me there because that's interesting as well. Why was the radical Black power movement, as first articulated by Malcolm X, then by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, then the Black Panthers and other organizations like it, why was it such a threat? Because two things. One, it challenged the very notion of settler colonialism, white supremacy, right? Um, but two, again, Malcolm X, it was international, right? Malcolm is the one who said it's not just here in the United States, it's all over the world. Western settler colonialism threatens all of us, but particularly racialized people, colonized people, right? SNCC took up that mantle. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee took up that mantle, particularly after the 67 war. There's a great book called Blacks. Is it Blacks in Palestine? Um, anyway, the author writes about Michael Fishbach. He writes about after the 67 war, SNCC was so deeply committed to the Palestinians because they saw as another victim of settler colonialism. They want to write a platform in one of their papers, a position paper, where they supported Palestine fully. And James Bevel, who was a lieutenant of Martin Luther King, opposed it, right? Because he thought it would offend Jewish donors to SNCC and to uh, 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 his organization. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but and he was right? But SNCC members were so committed to it that one member, and I'm not necessarily saying this was the right thing to do, but it shows their commitment. One SNCC member, a young man, pulled a gun on James Bevel, right? Pulled a gun and said, "No, we're going to put this in our platform." Now, that commitment ultimately cost SNCC its organization because it lost its funders, many of them Jewish, white liberals, whatever. And SNCC was disbanded, but the Black Panthers picked it up. That is why we are estranged now. The Black radical voice has been marginalized, and along with I'm 60 years old. I remember when Andrew Young was the ambassador to the United Nations, and he started back channel communications with Yasser Arafat and the PLO at the time. I think I was 11 years old at the time, 1976, 77, so I've been 12 maybe. I can't remember the year, but anyway, I was very young, right? In my household, my father was an auto worker, member of the UAW. I didn't know much about the Palestinians, but I knew we were on the side of the Palestinians, that we were on the side of Andrew Young, right? Most blacks in my neighborhood, even if they couldn't articulate it, at my age, we knew, no, we're with the Palestinians. That was a residual of the Black Power movement. Now today, right, because they've marginalized that Black radical voice. We've had people like Obama and Kamala Harris who speak for blacks, and they're speaking a very different tune, right? They're singing a very different tune. So now, if you talk to, not, I still think blacks are. Well, I know the numbers show it, but it's not as much as I think it would have been had it been 40 years ago. The numbers still show there's heavy support for Palestine, for Gaza, by Black people, but it's not what it used to be, right? And that's because we've been estranged from who we really are, right? Marx says capitalism really kind of separates you from, alienates you from who you really are, and that's really the problem, right? We don't have Malcolm, of course, is long dead. Martin Luther King is long dead. Fred Hampton is long dead. Kwame Ture, niece Stokely Carmichael is long dead, and this message slowly has been erased from our hard drive, right? We're still African people, but that marginalization of the Black radical voice from the conversation has slowly kind of degraded our commitment to the internationalism that Malcolm X talked about. And so we're at a place now. So I say now, I can say to you, I think it's going to happen. I hope it's going to happen. But it might not. And it might not because we are so separated, much like Occupy was. They knew they had to reach certain people, but they didn't know where they were. They didn't know how to talk to them. And that is a problem right now, right? Black Lives Matter took the Occupy fight a step further, but they're middle-class blacks who have been, taught to be like Obama, right? They didn't listen to the blacks on the ground. They didn't trust them. They didn't trust the working class blacks, people who like Michael Brown, right? They thought, we can be kind of an intermediary, interlocutor for blacks and whites, right? Which is not the case. No, you need to be a servant, as Huey Newton said. You need to serve the people. You need to be a servant of the poor and working class. And so, all of these things we need to relearn. I think we will, but we might not. I can't promise you that we will. I see signs on both sides that we are estranged to the point that the differences are irreconcilable, and that might win the day. It might.
Yeah. Let me ask you another question. You're mentioning Malcolm X. Obviously, Malcolm X is a huge sign of Islam in this country. Right? I mean, he's the voice of Islam in this country. Yes, may God have mercy on him, passed away. But he didn't just pass away; he was killed.
Yeah, assassinated. Yes,
assassinated. I mean, there's a symbolism there. There's
no question. No question.
That's resistance. There's a lot of talk about socialism. There's a lot of talk about Marxist theories and things like this. John, I mean, look, Islam, it has its own economic system. It challenges both the Marxist and the capitalist to bring about a system that was as just, it ruled the world for 1400 years. And then, you said something very interesting in the sense that, look, the only people today also, I mean, other than, let's say, in the US, in the whole world, most of the people that are resisting, colonial capitalism or settler capitalism are the Muslims. You look at the Palestinians, you look at Burkina Faso, you look at Mali, you look at all of that area of Sahel, Niger, all the way up to Morocco. You look at, I mean, now even nation states are being challenged. The whole idea of nation states is being challenged by, if you look at the convoy that came out of Tunisia, and now it's moving all the way up to the border of Gaza, and each border they're fighting to trying to go through, and all of this. And this has never happened, where millions of people are coming together, not recognizing the borders and saying, we have to go out there to protect those people who are being genocided. And those are Muslims. And they're from all colors. And this is all of Africa. I mean, this is Africa that's making the move happen. This is where you're from. I mean,
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
you see what I'm saying? I mean, it's not
I
us.
do. I
It's
do.
not Muslims of India. It's not Muslims of Pakistan. It's not Muslims of some whatever. But it's the Muslims of Africa again.
Right. Right. I
Look,
agree with you.
if you the revolutions, the so-called Arab Spring that took place, again, it began in Tunisia. It went to Libya, then it went to Egypt, then it went to Syria, and the place called Levant, and then all of this, and then it's going back again. The Muslim Africans have been the bread and butter of Islamic movements in the Muslim world, and even here, it's the Black African Muslims who are making who are to be honest, I think the ones that can lead anything in this country. But let me ask you, I mean, can you think of Islam the way you think of, let's say, Marxism or capitalism? That's a good question. You know that.
It is a great question. And I hadn't thought of it the way you just framed it, but I do agree with you, right? That when you think about what's happening in the Sahel, it is the Sahel region in Africa. It is Muslim African countries. You think about Libya and the role that Muammar Gaddafi played.
It's amazing. It's all Muslims and it's all black.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. Now I would say this: I don't think it's the only place we see this resistance to colonialism, because we see, and they're.
Oh yeah, no. I understand. I mean, you're seeing it in Central Africa. You're seeing
yeah. But
I mean, I'm sorry, in Central America.
It's the engine, though. I agree with you. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but I do agree with you. You asked me, do I think? I think, right. I believe in something called scientific Marxism, right, which is something different than political Marxism. Political Marxism was a great thing, for Black Americans, for America, period. In the 1930s, especially earlier than that, they really kind of led by pushing the Black voice. They really led this modernization of the country that began in the 1930s, really. But I'm not a Marxist. If you're a Marxist, you would say I'm not a Marxist. If you're a Marxist, you would say I'm not a Marxist. If you're not a Marxist, you would say I'm a Marxist. But so I say that to say I'm not pushing a Marxist vision. Like I don't know that that's the answer. I don't know if that's but I would
go ahead.
But just let me finish though. I would not be at all surprised to see if we do move towards, and I think we will, but when we move towards a more democratic society, I would not be at all surprised to see it have Muslim characteristics. I think you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but I think what's happening in the Sahel, I think Gaddafi's murder was such a horrifying event, traumatizing event for sub-Saharan Africans. So I lived in Africa for 4 years, South Africa, and he was revered. Muammar Gaddafi was revered, not quite as much, but almost as much as Mandela was. Right? I'm talking about by Black Africans. I was there when the Organization of African Unity rebranded. Was that it? Was that the original name? I think it was the African Union that rebranded to Organization of African Unity. It was in Durban, South Africa in 2001. Yeah. I was there for the whole event. And I can tell you, now Mandela wasn't there, but I think Robert Mugabe was at the time. And the person who got the loudest applause, I can tell you this, was Muammar Gaddafi. It wasn't close. And he didn't come up to the podium talking about, embracing the West. He was like, no, we got our own identity. We got our own agenda. They went crazy for Muammar Gaddafi. So I still like to say that you raised a point I hadn't really thought about, which is that I would not at all be shocked to see the next America, right, have some, and the next American economy, and the next the social sphere in which we relate to one another. I would not be at all surprised to see it have Muslim characteristics. Not at all. Not at all. The extent to which that goes, I don't know. Right? I don't know, what's going to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked at that at all. It really does have, and even, and the Nation of Islam is not, I understand they're not really Muslim, right? But even when we talk about reparations, right, for Black Americans, which I think has to be something more than just a check. It has to be control over our own community. I don't think we can achieve that without the Nation of Islam playing a role, a very real role. We can't, and I have differences with Mr. Farrakhan and all that. I mean, I think he played some role in Malcolm's death. He's confessed to that, and other things as well, right? But their influence is profound, and so I hadn't thought of it till you mentioned it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we could very well see some Muslim influences on the next American
I mean, look,
experiment.
if you look at the Black Rebellion that happened, the slave rebellion, let's say, most of the leadership was Muslim.
That's right. No question.
Yeah.
No question.
You look at even Black Lives Matter originally. I mean, you have names like Omar Muhammad, many others. I mean, it was led by many Muslims, and then now we see what we're seeing. But
and you also have, let me just say this very quickly because it's really important. You also have not just the Nation of Islam, but you have, because we this country sent so many Black men to prison, and so many Black men have gone to prison and found the Islamic religion, right? And you can't, you raise a profound point I hadn't thought about, but that probably explains why it's very likely that, especially in the Black community, you will see the Islamic religion have an effect on this resistance movement and whatever we come up with on the other side.
See,
I think that's very likely.
Here's the thing. Is it possible to say, because it is really interesting that you mentioned that many of the people that have been oppressed by capitalism, people at the end, when you go to jail, we know the whole situation, how African Americans have been marginalized and then pushed into the positions that they are in, the situation. It's oppression, period. And they found solace, they found peace, they found purpose in Islam. And so, there has to be a role. There's no way that Islam cannot play a role in this country, even though they're trying very hard to marginalize it.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Now, let me ask you one more question. Here's the thing. There's an interesting book. It was written in Chicago. It was University of Chicago. The name just doesn't come up. But I'm going to draw a scenario, and I just want you to think, is this possible again? So the book talks about how, for instance, it's talking about policies that the British, established in when they were colonizing, but then they practiced that. The Americans took that, the white Americans, let's say, they took that, and then they implemented that here. And this is how it goes. They knew that, look, the resources. At one point, you have a group of people who have no resource. They have no access to resources. And then they knew that this is not sustainable. So then you create a group within that group and you give it some access, just some access. Oh, all of a sudden, these guys can go to universities, they can drive, they have bank accounts, they have some. And then when you are oppressing that oppressed class, this class that was created from within that group is used to oppress it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this, it has happened. Can this happen again? Where it's
happening now.
Oh, so you're like Obama's, for instance. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I write about Obama in my book. I devote a whole chapter to him, really more than that. And I've seen this. I grew up in Indianapolis, right down the road from Chicago, lived in Chicago. And I knew this when I first heard Obama's name.
How can you leave Chicago, man?
The only reason I left Chicago was first time I left it for South Africa, and the second time for New York City, which is the only two cities I would leave Chicago for. Because let me tell you, I love Chicago to this day. It's a one of a kind city, and I've lived everywhere, and I love Chicago. And one of the reasons I love Chicago is the story of Harold Washington, right? Mm. And I just very quickly, I know you know the story, but for your audience that might not, Harold Washington, first black mayor in a city that is not now nor was ever majority black, about a third black, I think, back then in the 80s, almost 40%, maybe 35%, something like that, but not a majority. The Democratic Party, very much like the Democratic Party now, ignored the black community, even though it depended on the black community for its votes to push through the Daley, Richard Daley, Mayor Daley, the boss, his candidates, and push through the mayor himself through public office. In fact, Mayor Daley lost the white vote in 1960, I think it was. But the black community overwhelmingly voted for him and pushed him through past the post. But they weren't getting anything in return. Fred Hampton was assassinated. Chicago police played a role in that. And Mayor Daley died. They still didn't get anything after Mayor Daley died. And so they decided, black community, particularly the working class black community, decided, oh, we need to get our own candidate and elect him. They did. They organized, they raised money, they registered people to vote, and they got Harold Washington elected, who was, I think, had Harold Washington lived beyond his first term, basically died in the second term, or early in the second term. I think Marion Barry is probably the most transformative mayor, big city mayor, certainly in the second half of the 20th century. I think had he lived, it would have been Harold Washington, very progressive-minded mayor. Almost the moment he died, I read about this in the book, almost the moment he died, I think in 89, 88 maybe. Maybe the next year, a guy named Mel Reynolds was pushed to run for Congress in that first congressional district, can't remember which seat, but the seat that later Jesse Jackson Jr. held. And he was a Harvard graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, black, obviously, but he wasn't the kind of black politician we had ever seen before. He didn't represent unions or the people. He was pro-NAFTA. He was pro-Clinton's crime bill as a representative in Congress. And anyway, I realized this in retrospect. I actually dated a woman who was in his office, and she told me some things early on, and I wasn't smart enough to understand what she was telling me. But he got caught up in a sex scandal, younger, underage, teenage girls, and, didn't quite cut it. But he was the first Obama. It was a project that started in the universities and the think tanks to produce these colored Manchurian candidates, these black Manchurian candidates. And Mel Reynolds was the first that I can remember. And I was heavy into politics as a reporter at a big city newspaper. And Mel Reynolds was the first I saw this. And people talk about this. He talked like, what are you talking about? Right. But, he was this new Democrat, this new black Democrat. And that is the Mel Reynolds, who was the outlier in 1993, right, is now the template for black politicians, right? And this is the story of America. White settler colonialism survives by peeling off one layer after the next, right, to turn them against specifically the black population. Where everyone in the working class is exploited. Blacks are super exploited. And the reason for that is because you isolate us, because as the most exploited people, all right, or maybe it's because we're African, I don't know which, but either way, we are the most radical and progressive thinkers, right? And it's not that, if you listen to our greatest thinkers, Malcolm, Huey Newton, Fred Hampton, Kwame Ture, you'll never hear them talking about kill whitey. That's what they want, right? We're talking about, we're always talking about, this is what we're saying, basically, right? This is what they were saying. This is why Malcolm is so famous. They didn't say it specifically like this, but they raised the question, or they would raise the question now. Why do workers do 100% of the work for 42% of the pay? That's why they had to kill Malcolm, right? Because he raised questions like that. And that's why we have people now who will never say it. Kamala Harris is an avowed Zionist. She said so, right? Right? And so we have to, and I don't mean this literally, although, that's happened, right? But we have to kill that comprador class in the black community if we're ever going to become who we should be. We have to kill it metaphorically. That's what I'm saying, right? But I had a friend on my radio show yesterday, and she jokingly said, that the old what Malcolm said once, right? Why are there no Uncle Toms in China? They killed them all, right? So I'm not urging violence on your show, but I'm just saying that we need to kill them in a social sense, if not a physical sense. We need to be rid of them because they are the biggest barrier to our empowerment. And I don't mean just black people, I mean the entire country. They are the biggest barrier to our empowerment in 2025.
Last question here. There's all these protests that have been planned. Tomorrow was supposed to be a huge protest here in Chicago, and I mean, it's
across the country.
Yeah. Across the country. And then you have the president who was planning to have a birthday parade, using the tax money of the people to show off this. I don't know what he wants to show off right now, but what kind of attitude does that show you? I mean, this has never happened in the U.S. I mean, parades are not common in the U.S. It's common in other places, but it's not common where you have a whole parade as a birthday gift given to a president.
Yeah.
While there are protests that are happening where the poor are protesting.
Yeah.
So where are we going with this, man? I mean, this is, I know, and I'm asking you as let's say a few things. I'm asking you as an author. I'm asking you as a journalist. I'm asking you as a black man. I mean, because you represent a lot of things in these things. There's, and look, here's why I'm asking. There's a way the media is presenting this whole situation, right? There's a media, there's a manufacturer media type situation going on, and how all of this is being presented. Then you have the elite class, whether they'll have the parade or not, I'm not sure, but and then the people are there is a brain drain that's taking place in this country, right?
No question.
Which is also a sign of decline.
Yes.
You have students are going back. They're saying this is not the place for us anymore, or at least they're being deported literally for writing pieces, doing research, PhD work, whether it's exposing Zionism, whether it's exposing policies, whatever it is. But so the intellectual decline is already set in. There's no question about this. But tell me, man. I mean, as a journalist, and as an author, what do you want the people that are watching this to understand? What's happening here, and what should be the steps? How do we, should everyone become part of what's happening here, or whether they like it or not, they're going to become part of this? Or what's the?
You're going to be part of it one way or another. That's for sure. What's happening, and I know I sound like a broken record, this is the collapse of the empire. And unfortunately, this is happening when Joe Biden was in office, but we have in office now. And I say this as, I almost say this without any judgment. It's just a fact for anyone, particularly of my age, who remembers in America. I remember America in 1980. And it was, I don't know that I would ever compare America and its intellectualism, its level of intellectualism to what I saw in South Africa or even Argentina, where people are really, really smart and educated, have an understanding of the world, communism, things like that.
They're producing PhDs. It was crazy. They were producing the most economists.
Yeah. I mean, Iranians.
That's true. That's interesting also. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Some of the smartest people I've ever met, or most of the smartest people I've ever met, come from different countries. I met an Australian couple in New York City about 15 years ago on a park bench. We talked for 3 hours. They knew more about America than most Americans. So that's what's happening. And it's based a lot in this anti-intellectual ethos. This, if there's a book called The Age of Empires, I think that's it.
The Age of Empire. There's a book.
Yeah, John Glove, and he talks about how empires all go through the same stages, and the penultimate stage is the age of intellectualism. The last is the age of spectacle. We're in the age of spectacle, right? We don't really produce any real scholarship. Our scholars. I will say this, and you will appreciate, I think. I don't know if we've had a real scholar in this country since Edward Said died, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And I think about Edward Said. I'm helping a friend write a book, and about medicine. And it just struck me the other day that the theory of Orientalism is really the what we're trying to write about, Orientalism in medicine, right? And so we still have a few, Gerald Horn, Anthony Montero, Robert D.G. Kelly, and some others. We still have some. But
I guess Henry
so,
Kissinger is not on the list.
no, I would not put Henry Kissinger on any list of. um, but let me say this: Trump is he's almost like he's like they're all clown figures, right? All of our since Nixon, at least Nixon was an evil man. He was a very smart man, but the rest I think have all been clowns, including Obama. I don't really have any black friends left who like Obama, so I can say that. But um, Trump may be the dumbest president in my lifetime, and I'm not even saying that with any judgment. He's just not a smart man. He's overplaying his hand. He doesn't really. Trump was elected because of the racism of the American people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's treating white people like N-words, right? He's not going to make it, right? He's certainly not going to be elected. And I would not be shocked at all to see, well, he can't be reelected. Even J.D. Vance won't be reelected, or Republicans won't be elected. I would not be shocked at all to see him be the first president to be impeached and removed from office. He has no constituency anymore, right? Or at least what constituency he has, he's alienated. Even the MAGA people, they don't like cuts to Medicaid, cuts to SNAP, the food assistance program, cuts to proposals to cut Social Security. They don't like that. He can't survive that. So he's overplayed his hand. He thinks that it's his own personal magnetism. It is not, right? And so when they come for him, which I think they will, and when I say they, I'm talking about Wall Street, because they really are the power, the deep state Wall Street, they really are the power in this country. Who's going to support him, right? It's going to be people who are upset about immigration, people who are upset about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Iran, people who are upset about the economy, people who are upset about losing their federal job. Who is Trump's constituency, right? Even his MAGA supporters are leaving him, right? The polls show that. Small so far, but next month
Elon Musk left, so
oh yeah, I mean who supports Trump? Right now in what is this, June of 2025? I mean, who Trump hasn't he's lost support since he took office, right?
So now it's 54%.
Yeah, this is going to end badly. What I would say, though, and this is what I would say, what will save us, what the only thing that will soften the landing, the cushion the landing for the American people writ large, Muslims, blacks, working class whites, people of conscience, right, is if we reorganize, self-organize. We need institutions to speak for the American people. I'll be honest with you. At best, right, the best case scenario, I don't see blacks and whites and in the big cities, blacks and Latinos, blacks and Muslims, we tend to have a pretty good relationship. But in the best case scenario, I don't see blacks and whites holding hands, singing "Kumbaya," living next door to each other. I don't see it, but I don't think we need that. I think what we need is, again, like Fred Hampton said, black power for black people, white power for white people, Muslim power for Muslim people, X power for anybody we left out. Everybody controlling to a great extent, right, the institutions in their community, right? I mean, murder is still murder, theft is still theft, right? But what you teach your children, well, that's up to you, right? What how much a home should cost in your community, right? South side of Chicago, North Philadelphia, Southeast Washington, D.C. What you teach your children, how much a house should cost, how you treat your homeless population, uh, uh, the banks, who runs the banks, how much money do they lend for, what's the interest rate on their loans, who do they lend to? All that stuff needs to be decided by the community in which they reside, right? And that's one place where we can use our segregation to the benefit of the people. So that's what I think is the ultimate goal. And I think, maybe after a century of living like that, hopefully, maybe we won't have white supremacy and racism anymore, right? But that, at least, I think is the goal in the short term, is for people to have power over their own communities.
All right, with that, we'll end this. But just you've written a few books. Can you mention some of those? Actually, what we're going to do is next time, as obviously this is not the last time I actually want to discuss some of the
I
books
hope
that
not.
you've written. Yeah, we're going to discuss some of the books this time, just because there's so much going on with
Yeah,
all of this news. We thought we have to cover this with you. But if you can, please, I mean, some of the books that you have written, so that people can kind of, maybe we can, people can buy it, read it. This would be interesting to see. You've written many books, it seems.
that many. I've written three. I've tried to write more, and I'm going to write more. But the first one was Flat Broke in the Free Market: How Globalization Fleeced Working People. That was a good book. I'm proud of that one. My most recent book, though, is this one. I am very proud of this, I will admit.
Class
Class War in
war.
America: How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, "Are you a worker or are you white?" That one I'm really very proud of. I would love to come back and talk to you
Yeah,
about that, as well as
yeah,
what's going on in Iran right now, which I think
yeah.
is really an inflection point. But
We just had a
or
podcast
anything you want.
right before this. We had a podcast on Iran.
Okay,
So we
okay,
were talking to somebody that, so why not? We'll bring you up and then we'll talk about, especially class war. I think when you talk about class war, Iran would be the global South. I mean, if
no
that's the
question.
class war, if you're talking about this, yeah, I mean,
No
yeah, we
question.
have to talk about. Let's talk about all this. And let's, there's too much going on not to be talking. So we need to,
Right, right, right.
we need to be discussing.
The discussion, particularly by people like us who can frame the discussion the right way, right? I just very quickly, I was telling someone earlier today, I said, you will never hear the legacy news media in this country or anywhere in the West ask this simple question: how does the US tell Iran they can't have nuclear weapons?
Right.
Israel got them.
And
You will never hear that in the legacy media.
and your book would fit in globalization. I thought it was all
Yeah,
about globalization. Then why can't they have
exactly.
weapons?
Right,
Yeah, I mean, the
right, right,
hypocrisy it's right in front of our
right.
eyes, man. Uh,
Exactly, exactly. We got to call it out.
we will. All right, John. Thank you so much for being on the show again.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Please, those who were listening, I hope you guys took a note of the books that he's written. We'll put some of those links in the comment boxes where people can go check it out. I think some of them are on PDF too. No?
Um, it might be. Flat Broke might be. I'm not sure.
Okay.
This
All
one
right. So
just came out last year, so not yet.
okay. We'll actually put out some of at least the names so that people can support. I think we have to support authors like you.
Right. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Until next time, John. We'll see you next time.
Can't wait. Can't wait.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having me, brother.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.